So as maybe many of you have seen in the invitation and the promotion materials that we have sent out, the idea here is to have our first IFCN talk. And since we're still waiting to see how global fact is going to look like in 2021 and second year of pandemic, this is a way the IFCN found to get the community together. And I see we have many people here. I see Indian people. Hey guys, it's late for you. Wonderful. And to meet and discuss stuff that we could probably discuss in a global fact, but this is going to be open and this is going to be public. And as you might need to know, this is also going to be recorded for those that can't join us. So I think we can go. So you're probably seeing here on the screen two beautiful guys, my good friends, Lucas Graves and Francisco Britto, Chico, for friends, right, Chico? Hello, hello. So first of all, we have an inside joke here. We all speak Portuguese, so this session is going to be fully in Portuguese. I'm sorry, guys. Just kidding. Oh my God, I see North Macedonia joining. Hello, hello. So so it's 9:03 in the morning, and I hope you are all awake and happy. It's Monday. It should be a nice week. And so we're gonna start from now. And as I said, this is the first IFCN talk. And I'm not at the IFCN office. We are all at home. We are protecting ourselves from COVID, and I hope you're also safe and healthy. And the idea here is to start talking about issues that are of interest of the IFCN's community. This means not only fact checkers, but also researchers, professors, and everyone that is interested in fact checking and battling against misinformation, right? So I'm Cristina Tardáguila, as some of you know. I'm the associate director here at the IFCN. And the goal today is to have a super informal 1 hour long conversation. And this is why I brought two good friends, Lucas Graves and Chico. So, hey guys, I made a very short intro for this, so we are all on the same page about what the topic is today. It's deplatforming, a wonderful word in English. I know I love English where they make like new words out of putting parts of stuff together, and deplatforming works fine. And I wanted to know that if you have any questions, comments, you should use the Q&A that is in the bottom of your screen. This is the best way for us and for me, especially, to see what your comments are, what your questions are. And again, this is going to be super informal, so make sure you participate there. We're going to have like 30 minutes and 25 now, hearing Chico and Lucas, and let's start. So first of all, we have to remind a bit what's going on in the deplatforming planet, right? Back on January 6th, social media platforms took action against Donald Trump, and they first blocked some interactions with a video he posted that day. Then after that, some platforms deleted content that he had published. And later, the same day, some platforms locked Trump's profiles, launching what we at the IFCN decided to call the great deplatforming. From that day on, so many others have been blocked, right? So we saw Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitch, and Snapchat doing stuff. And that day, they took this big step, and this is what we are going to discuss today. Was this a good move? Was it a bad move or risky? Was it censorship, right? So since January 6th, guys, at least 50 actions have been taken by other platforms to respond all that happened in January 6th. So we're talking about Google, Snapchat, Telegram, Amazon, Airbnb, MailChimp, PayPal, Vimeo, and many others. And yes, I'm reading because I can't remember all the platforms that are now deplatforming. And of course, this has had a international impact. We have seen Mexican President Antonio Manuel López Obrador saying that Trump's deplatforming was a censorship. He is completely right. I mean, he's completely strong in that message. We also saw Angela Merkel, the Prime Minister in Germany, saying that, well, she believes that it's possible to interfere on freedom of speech, but it should only be done according to law, not by private companies. And well, the latest information that we have, and I know Chico is going to maybe talk about that, it comes from Brazil. Last Wednesday, YouTube suspended Terça Livre. It was a very big channel on YouTube, and it had received 2 strikes from violating the platform's rules. And now they just can't log in on YouTube and do anything else because they created a second channel to, let's say, avoid the first suspension. Well, again, accusations of censorship appeared. And so this first IFCN Talks brings together 2 of my friends, as I said earlier, Lucas Graves from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Chico Britto, the director of InternetLab, and they're here. And I love, and what I love the most about these 2 is that, as I said, they speak Portuguese, but they are also amazing researchers. And I'm really happy to have you guys here. So our goal, as I said, is to have super informal 30 minutes conversations among the 3 of us, and then open to questions. So should we start, Lucas, Chico? Do you want to say something before we jump to questions? No?
Thanks for hosting this, Chris. And I especially want to hear, I hope we do have a chance to hear from fact checkers, because it's such a tricky question. And really, it's fact checkers who are experts in many ways. So I'm really curious to hear what people think about, about whether these efforts have been good or bad.
Me too. Looking forward.
All right, so as I planned a bit, let's start easy and let's go with the teacher here, right, Lucas? So let me review a basic idea. Can we measure the impact of deplatforming? So here's the question. You are a big researcher in this field, and you probably saw a popular study that came out a few days or weeks ago saying that disinformation dropped by 73% after Trump's deplatforming. From the IFCN's perspective, it was kind of interesting to see that study because it was criticized because at least it didn't count that another 70,000 accounts were also deplatformed when Twitter and Facebook blocked Trump. So here's again, is there any data that can prove deplatforming has worked in terms of lowering misinformation? And if we had to make this analysis today, if we wanted to measure this now, how would you build it? Is it possible? Over to
you. Thanks, Cristina, for starting with such an easy one. So look, I think the short answer, if we're looking at this sort of great deplatforming that just happened, is that yes, it seems to have had a really substantial impact. Measuring exactly how big that impact was, trying to attach a number to it, a percentage to it, is tricky. It's always going to depend, for one thing, on how you define misinformation. It's going to depend on which platforms you're monitoring. And of course, it's also going to depend on what else happened in the world, right? So in the best case, you might be able to show a pretty convincing correlation between the deplatforming and then some reduction in misinformation defined in a particular way. So that Signal Labs study that you mentioned, that I think you're talking about, that one focused really narrowly on election-related misinformation. So all of their search terms were, election-related. They were following election-related hashtags. And as you mentioned, it followed this really epic, unprecedented crackdown across multiple platforms on not just Trump, but also tens of thousands of other accounts. We've never seen, I think it's fair to say, we've never seen deplatforming on this scale in the age of social media. So there's every reason to think it was effective. We know that high follower accounts play a disproportionate role in spreading misinformation online. We know that Trump has always been in a league of his own when it comes to that, right? He has tens of millions of followers who will retweet basically anything he puts out there. So let's assume that it had a really substantial effect. If you define misinformation in a particular way, maybe it was 73%, which is what that study concluded. But then you get to 2 new questions, which is, how durable is that effect? How long will it last? where will these discourses go? Where will people go once they've been pushed off of these networks? You know, we don't know what it takes to have a lasting impact on these kinds of conspiracy discourses. And then also, and I think this is the big question today, even if it is effective, even if you can reliably cut, you know, disinformation in half or something with a massive deplatforming campaign like this, is this the right answer? What are the risks? You know, when is this kind of deplatforming called for? Who gets to decide? I remember that I was really upset. I think it was 2010 or 2011 when WikiLeaks, you know, had its hosting and its financial services processing suspended. So I'm uncomfortable giving those powers unilaterally to a handful of gigantic tech companies. As happy as I might have been to not have to hear from Trump for a couple of months. And I sort of avoided the second part of your question. I mean, yes, if you define misinformation narrowly and you specify a particular period of time, you can make a convincing correlation between deplatforming efforts and some reduction. And I think, you know, it's not surprising that it was as substantial as it was, at least in the short term.
Chico, any reactions to that, or should I jump to your first question?
You can jump. Like I'm actually learning with you guys. Like this numbers really struck me on last week or some days ago, and I was just learning with you. But let's jump.
Let's jump. So just one quick comment. I see Pablo Medina from Colombia Tech making a really good point in the chat. He's saying that, yes, media outlets around the planet have uncritically shared the study made by, what's that again, Lucas Signal? What is the name?
Signal with a Z?
Signal. Yes. So that's an interesting point too. Like how has media outlets misinformed about a misinformation study? That's a big topic for us. But Chico, well, go, Lucas. You want to say something?
It's also worth saying, I don't think they released the study itself. At least I never saw it. So it was reported on by the Washington Post, but they've not been very transparent about the study itself, their methodology.
Transparency, always that word that comes together with all fact-checking conversations. Hey, Chico, so to your first question, the one that I have here for you, I know we as Brazilians, we are dealing with the idea of deplatforming, meaning censorship, right? But I heard you in a podcast that was really, really good. Your participation, congrats on that. It's a podcast by Folha de São Paulo, a Brazilian newspaper. You were explaining like the differences between the concept of censorship and the difference between laws in different countries and how every country defends the freedom of speech. But, you know, do you believe that deplatforming, the way it happened in the United States, will spread globally? Or do you think platforms will move to a, let's say, country-specific deplatforming, like following national rules and stuff? How do you envision that?
So it's a very good question, Chris. I think the companies will be pressured on both sides to act and not to act, because they are pressured already, and this pressure will only go higher. So what I think that all of these years they try to not be country specific in policy, but they at the same time want to be want to have context-based decisions. And what I think is that they are country-based in attention. Like they are country-specific in attention. They're paying attention like differently from country to country. And what I would say about that is that what is censorship here in Brazil could not be censorship in the US, or what is censorship in the US could not be censorship in another country. And that the DNA of these companies, it's like their business model, it's fully embedded in a US model of freedom of expression. And this is why they've been criticized here in Brazil for a long time, like especially because of their resistance to not remove some content that, for example, Brazilian politicians want to be out of their networks. And what I'm seeing to happen is that the acceptable freedom of expression standards in the US are moving, like the target is moving. And now, as they are country-based in attention, and their attention is mostly United States, they're changing the way that they handle content, and it's being clear that they have these different sensibilities through territories. And I think that I'm concerned with that, because like at the same time that they need to be context based, and I think this is a good push against them. What I'm concerned is that they will need to handle a pressure for consistency, and as they have this pressure, it is going to be fun to see how they will handle because like, of course, I'm not discussing the discussion itself like regarding Trump, but um, as in their backyard, they changed the way that they saw content moderation, and they're being more harsh against some kind of content, um, to see if they're going to shift or not globally. It's going to be fun, and it's no easy. There is no easy path, you know. Like if they go one path, they'll be criticized. If they go to the other path, they will be criticized too. But yeah, like I do not believe that they will go fully content specific, like country specific, but I feel that they know that if they're not in like bring some context to the decision and relate to this context, they will have an even a better time, like better no, even a worse time if they go without that. So yeah.
So what Chico's saying, that burn the roof, you know, let's see everything on fire from now on. I know. Yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch. So just to, I think there is another question for you, Chico, that I think it connects to that. When we talk about deplatforming, and we had a conversation, guys, who those, hey audience, those who are joining us now, we are about 70 people. Thank you. Lucas and Chico and I, we have discussed what this was going to look like. And Chico had this great idea of talking about different layers of content. So, you know, deplatforming for, let's say what, fascist, open neo-Nazi content should be easier than, you know, electoral content. So Chico, can you share that idea of different layers of misinformation and how hard this could be for, I mean, another thing that is going to be hard for platforms.
Yeah, and I want to hear Lucas about that too. And so I think that the difficult thing about Trump's decision, like deplatforming Trump, is that there are too many layers, different layers that are in place on that. So first you have the policies to prevent harm, like real world harm. Second, you have the policies of a public authority, like it's different to have like a common person and a politician. Same, because there is some newsworthiness on what they're saying. There is some issues of access to information because they are public authorities. So two, and you have electoral integrity policies, like to respect democracy and to respect the democratic procedures, such as elections. So, and I think there are more, but these layers are big enough to to bring us some confusions, because they are kind of hardwired within their selves, and it's very difficult to separate them and to understand like how this decision was made and how this decision is accountable to each one of these policies, right? I don't know, Lucas, what do you think?
I think that's a great point. And in a way, the fact that they waited so long, right? The fact that Trump was given free reign for so long, you know, until the election was at hand, and especially until he'd already lost, right? For any significant deplatforming to take place, as you say, makes it really hard to say what exactly they were responding to. And of course, the platforms don't want to articulate their policies in any more detail than they have to when it comes to, especially when it comes to public figures. So yeah, it's very tricky. You know, the goal should be to have really sort of simple, clear rules that are followed consistently. And I mean, I think Chico brings up a great point that those might not be the same rules in every country, depending on the, on the sort of prevailing legal doctrines and political traditions. Which is really tricky for platforms, but you want to have sort of obvious, simple rules applied consistently, and we want to be able to know what rule applied in which case. You want there to be some mechanism for adjudicating. I mean, I personally think that the Facebook Oversight Board, let's see what happens in the long run, but I love the idea of that, right? The idea that somebody should have to articulate, okay, this is why why we took this moderation step, and you can, there's a channel for you to respond to that and to challenge it and so on.
Hey, I just said this because Chico and we have been discussing the oversight board of Facebook for weeks now, but we're gonna have another IFCN talk just about that for sure. Hey, I'm gonna ask you the second question, Lucas, because I see that Yoon Ring from Seoul has posted a very interesting comment here, and this connects to the question that I have from you. She's saying that deplatforming is a way of getting away from the giant platforms. And I wonder, in your experience, you've been researching fact-checking and the battle against misinformation for years now. And do you think that, misinformation is like water in your hands? Will it flow from big platforms to those that we kind of don't know? And how can that happen? Or what should we get ready for?
I think it is like water. That's a good metaphor, but the sort of, the viscosity of the water varies depending on the political climate and on what the misinformation relates to. So, I mean, there's no question that in this case, all of these discourses, all of these rumors, a lot of these false claims about the election, and about coronavirus, will flow to other platforms, online and offline, of course, right? These things don't disappear just because we don't see them online, but we don't know exactly what shape that'll take. I mean, I think it's useful to think of misinformation as sort of exploiting opportunities that exist in the media environment, but also in the political environment. And that's because, of course, the misinformation is not doing anything on its own. It's driven by people. And so as a result, some kinds of rumors, are cyclical. They come up in different forms every few years. Fact checkers talk about this all the time. And they sort of fade into the background when they become less relevant. That's the sort of thing you could imagine with, with the coronavirus. Once we get this virus under control, which we eventually will, then those sorts of rumors will fade into the background and they'll come back. There'll be really clear echoes of the current rumors the next time that there's any pandemic on this scale. So some things are cyclical, but a lot of the lies that Trump has promoted, the election-related misinformation and the QAnon, misinformation, may be quite durable because they're now attached to pretty firm political structures and political identities in the US. So that gives them some resistance, right? That gives them some life, even when they're pushed off of particular platforms, so that we would expect them to sort of resurface when the opportunity arises again. And I'll just say, the most important question is always whether other politicians pick up the source. I mean, we often talk about misinformation spreading online, but the really important question is whether, major political figures and other like media leaders are repeating false rumors. I mean, if we want to promote accountability, that's the level that matters more than anything, right? I mean, if Republicans held one another accountable, just to use the US example, for promoting QAnon related rumors, that would have a much bigger effect than, in the long run, than any sort of deplatforming would. Like, we need elites to deplatform each other when something is totally ridiculous.
That's so cool, the idea of deplatforming each other. And I think this connects to the question I had for Chico, my friend. And is, people say that companies, and I'm talking about social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and all others, they have too much power. But I heard you saying that we could have power in that too, and that's just what Lucas has said. How do we deplatform each other from sharing hoaxes? And this connects to what Desiree Garcia from Spain is asking also, like, is there a regulation? Should we envision a regulation flow for deplatforming? And what is your take on this? Do you believe a legislation could or should restrict deplatforming, or what is citizen participation on this, Chico?
Well, first things first, I know that you, Chris, and the community of fact checkers know there is no silver bullet either on regulation or technical solution for that. And this is this is a good way to start. But I think that I believe in regulation. Like, I'm a lawyer. I know that it's necessary, and we need to think about like intelligent ways to push companies to the direction that we want to. But the problem is when the intention kind of like the intention of regulation creates anxiety and creates an impression that will solve things. And for example, if we say in a law that platforms should act upon user content that it's built or it's posted to harm someone, who is going to interpret it? Like to interpret that? Like, who's going to say what is harm? Who's going to say who is being harmed? If the companies would say that, if the companies were in the law in that position, they will only be more powerful than they are, because like they will have all the incentives to act on content, and not, for example, the incentives to restrain themselves and to like restrict their power in a sense. So what I am thinking is that we have some paths. One, I think, is to have some oversight, like public oversight, or not private oversight, on content moderation, like activity. Like, this is a risk activity. This is a necessary activity. Platforms would be terrible if content moderation would not be at place, because like we would have like lots of child exploitation images, lots of like really really bad content if content moderation, for example, was not in place. So it's necessary, it's risky, it really goes wrong like in a lots of cases, especially when it gets scaled. So this is one thing that needs to be regulated, mostly to provide some value-based principles and some transparency to the activity, like for us to know what's happening and to have some accountability. And I think that we have another path, which is we, like different countries, different society, as a society, regulate what some big amplifiers such as politicians can do and do not when they have profiles. It's a difficult path, but what I really think is that we are talking about networks. Networks are resilient. You can't control what's on the network. What you can do is to see them as networks and act on different nodes that have most capacity to amplify some messages. And these like important nodes, in my opinion, are these public figures. For example, can a politician block someone on Twitter? Yes or no? Can a politician use a public profile or a state-based profile to say whatever he wants without any rule that we as a society want to put on that? Because like this profile is, for example, a profile that is institutional in a sense, like part of the president's, for example. I think that this kind of rule limits the power of platforms, because platforms don't have nothing to say about that. If we say that a president cannot block someone on Twitter, Twitter will have just to obey that. Like, and we are creating like different limits to their power, that it's not like the decision is not passing through them. The decision is going directly from us to the politicians, for example. So I think we need to reshape the agenda to have not only like a regulation on content moderation practices, but also have our own content moderation regulation for specific kinds of profiles, for example, as a society, and not like these would not be on, I don't know, private policies, but on law, for example, on regulation. And it's super difficult actually, because like this can be turned into censorship in a very fast pace. So we need to really be careful on how to do about that.
Lucas, before I get to you, because I really like, I would love to hear you on this suggestion that Chico brings. And Desiree, I hope this kind of explains what Chico's thinking, like there could be a regulation for the platform, but maybe we could regulate first how politicians behave on platforms, you know, from a law point of view. Is that what you're saying, Chico? And if yes, Lucas, what is your take on this?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I love the idea, you know, in principle of developing institutions that are separate from the platforms, that emerge from civil society, that, you know, that come up with rules or guidelines for when different kinds of deplatforming are appropriate in a very public way, right? This is why things like the oversight board are so interesting. You know, we want a situation where you can go and understand a ruling, why it was reached, and that allows a kind of a smart conversation about what sorts of standards make sense for different kinds of speech and in different political environments, et cetera. The tricky thing is how you set up a standard in advance, at least in the US, you know, because of the First Amendment legal tradition, how you would set up a standard for, you know, in effect, prior restraint of politicians' speech on social media. You know, that'd be quite difficult given our legal tradition.
Can I say something? I think that this kind of limit could be a limit on intent or even on behavior and not exactly on content. For example, if a president or like a politician creates 5 accounts to speak on 5 accounts differently, maybe like this is not like restraining that, for example, is not something that will go against First Amendment doctrine, but will, like, I don't know, create some rules on how this speech would be made. And I actually like different countries can do different things, right? Like in the US, they can have it through, and in Brazil, for example, we can restrain what Bolsonaro is saying, like as a society, because our legal doctrine is different, right? So, and I think actually, I don't know what you think, guys, but this difference from country to country is actually good, because it diverges us from a mainstream trend that big populist leaders can amplify this information in the whole world, right?
Lucas, before we start with the questions in the Q&A, the last one for you. And I really want to hear this because this is driving me crazy. Like, how do fact checkers prepare for what's coming after deplatforming? I know we're seeing a Signal, Telegram, WhatsApp, you know, encryption. What should we expect and how do we prepare for that? If you have the answer.
I really want to hear the answer too. So I hope we'll have a chance to hear from fact checkers so they can weigh in. But I think that, you know, increasingly fact checkers are getting used to a world where their work has particular kinds of consequences, right? And the more that we see sort of clear, articulated policies around different kinds of deplatformings, the more that there's kind of an automated sequence of steps so that, you know, I mean, you know, we don't know what happens exactly after a post is found to be fake on Facebook, but we want to know. And in a world where we do know, then fact checkers have to accept that, right? That finding that a claim is false, or that, you know, that a bit of information can't be substantiated, leads to some set of consequences in the world. The more that we develop these institutional structures, the more that becomes routine. It's really comfortable for journalists to say, look, we're just in the position of putting information out there, you don't have to believe it. We're not prescribing any result. But the more that fact checkers are part of monitoring and enforcement mechanisms in an official way, in an institutional way, the more that fact checking leads to direct outcomes. And that can be really difficult. I mean, I think it's necessary, but it's really difficult. And it just increases the pressure on fact checkers and the scrutiny of fact checkers so that they really have to be transparent about their methodologies. It puts a lot more pressure on the code of principles and on the accreditation mechanisms, because again, the more that fact checking, sort of automatically produces particular outcomes, then the more scrutiny there's going to be to how fact checking works. And so it just kind of raises the stakes a little bit. But I think it's sort of necessary. And I'd love to hear how fact checkers feel about that.
Yeah, let's jump to that. And Chico, just one thing, I know encryption is an issue, but we are seeing the movements from big companies to, let's say, message apps that do have encryption. So is this going to be an issue because fact checkers do not know what is viral, or they have a hard time knowing what's viral on WhatsApp and Telegram. How can we solve that? Do you have I know you're not from the fact checking, you don't have the fact checking background, but I would love to hear somebody that comes from another perspective. How could you solve this?
I think we are on baby steps on figuring out how to deal with encrypted messaging apps. Actually, like, we are now doing a research at InternetLab. Like, what we are trying to do is to discover what's happening, doing surveys and focus groups with users, and to like have in-depth investigations on behavior of this kind of users. And what actually we are understanding is that in this kind of group, especially on WhatsApp, I think Telegram has a different dynamics, and it worries me a lot, but whatever. What's happening on WhatsApp, at least in Brazil, is that we are starting to see a community content moderation on WhatsApp groups growing. So different groups, for example, a group of like a church group or a sports hobby group, or these different kinds of groups have, of course, an administrator, and this administrator is enforcing even more and more different kinds of rules to make actually this group functionable in a way. And so it's their role as moderation, as kind of community moderator. And I think that we need to understand how we can reach this kind of person to have a conversation about disinformation, or a conversation about different kinds of stuff, because in this kind of app, these are key figures. These are like the most important stakeholders that can actually do something. And of course, this is super difficult, right? Because like they are all over the country. They are like they are all over the place. But at least we are starting to see that they are understanding their role as moderator, like differently from, I don't know, 2018, for example, that moderators were, I don't know, giving a lot of room to users to do whatever they want on groups, for example.
So, okay, let's do some questions from here. And I'm just gonna go as people wrote. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correct, Zi Yong Li, saying that the UN Rabat Plan of Action specifies a 6-part threshold test on hate speech. And we also have the link in the chat. So if you want to learn more about that, it's useful. So we hear the question is, would that be a possible starting point for social media companies to use when deciding on whether to deplatform a social media account? I mean, we have like, a standard, if I understand this wrong, Zi Yong Li, and sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong. So who would like to take that?
Chico.
It's the second question, Chico.
Is the second question?
Yes.
Okay.
The one that the Desiree we've answered.
Yeah, I think it's extreme too. Like, it's good to have like international standards on that, and as we are seeing like what Facebook oversight board is doing, like when they're justifying their decisions, they are bringing this kind of principle to the decision to make it more legitimate in a sense. So I think it's a start, but the problem with multilateral treaties and international law on that is that they provide, in my opinion, they provide a starting point, but different countries and context will act in a very, very hard way on different issues. So it's difficult to run of what's happening on the context, you know. So it's a starting point. I think if we have this kind of institution like the oversight board, it's like it's an argument that is strong on this kind of, I don't know, institution, because like they're trying to be global. They're trying to be something like, I don't know, Carol's feature were saying that it's something like the UN or something, that the Facebook oversight board could be something like that. And at least on that institution, this kind of argument is more strong. But yeah, like when it comes to what's happening in conflict, in context, I think that this kind of principle will have a hard time on standing, you know. I don't know what Lucas says.
Lucas, you want to say something? I can just say that I think it's going to be super hard to have an international one set of rules, you know, what you should do, what you can't do. I mean, one thing is you're in Brazil, another thing is when if you're in South Korea, or something else is Nigeria. I mean, completely different situations. Lucas, any comment, or should I jump?
Just ideally that you have, you know, principles that might be more or less universal, but how those are translated into rules will vary depending on the legal environment.
So let's, I'm adding two questions here from this, oh my God, this Jair Ziberi and Clara Becker, my friend. They are all both talking about like the limits of the platforming, who decides the platforming, you know, and I think the second question that Clara asks is very interesting. Won't all the platforming seem arbitrary until the platforms can be consistent in applying their internal politics, like, you know, other internal politics, and should be applied first, if I understand this correct, Clara? And then when they're good in doing the other content and their other internal politics, then the platforming could be a topic. There's so much behind before that. What do you think? Do they have a problem in actually being consistent with their internal politics, and what is the limit to that in freedom of speech?
I don't quite understand the part about the internal politics. Is that the...
Okay, that's Clara. If I'm not wrong, I'm not wrong, just I understand that there are so many other internal policies that platforms should be putting in place. Like, let's say if somebody says that, somebody writes me and says I'm going to be stabbed, I report it to Twitter, let's say. What does Twitter do? Right? And they need to be good at those easy things first, and then moving to the platforming. Maybe is that what you meant, Clara? I hope so. And you guys, if you can say something.
I have something to say about like sounding arbitrary or not. I think every content moderation decision that like against you will sound arbitrary in a sense. And this argument of consistency is super difficult when we think about, for example, how the judiciary handle cases of freedom of expression in different countries. For example, in Brazil, we have like a super general provision on what you can say and what you could not say. And what is happening is a very non-consistent application of this very general rule that is happening actually on the judiciary. So in my opinion, and I'll provoke you guys a little bit, is that like in Brazilian judiciary, we do not have this consistency that people are demanding from platforms. Actually, we have a more detailed policy on platforms regarding content moderation than we have like predictability of decision in the Brazilian judiciary, for example. And so saying that, I think that I think that the problem would not be people saying that it's arbitrary to deplatform. The great, like the most important thing is to have like a structured process that works and that can be criticized, but at least is predict, like you can predict what's happening, and, and it's value based, and you know the value. Like if this is in place, of course some people will think it's wrong, but at least you have that, and at least like, because like transparency can be a very lazy argument for lots of people, you know. And this is what actually it's on my mind now. Everyone is talking about transparency, but there's lots of transparency that we need to bring to the discussion, at least to make platforms accountable, that they are already being transparent, and we could do that. So I don't know, Lucas, you were nodding. Tell me what you think about that.
No, I want to associate myself with all of the really smart things that Chico just said. It's really easy to make fun, for instance, of Facebook's ridiculous internal rule guide. There have been a few articles about this. It was really built up, their moderation policies were built up ad hoc over the years. They're incredibly specific, they're deeply flawed, but nobody has said, well, how can you do this? How should you do this? I mean, it's really hard. It's really thorny, right? And a few people have raised the question of whether applying these policies scales, whether applying oversight scales. And I think the answer to that is something that Chico was hinting at, which is that, it's not that you'd have oversight of every little decision along the way. Ideally, you have a series of layers. You have a values-based set of principles that are more or less universal. And then you have, sort of large lines being drawn through kind of precedent-setting cases that are more or less public. Maybe those are adjudicated. Those are the things that wind up being argued about. And then you have more routine enforcement. And by the way, platforms are already doing this. I mean, the debate isn't should we institutionalize deplatforming? They are deplatforming every day, right? And lots of people do experience it as being deeply unfair. Lots of people are posting, public health messages, and they get banned because there's nudity in that message or something. I mean, there's all kinds of active regulation and moderation of speech happening every day across the platforms. So this is the reality. The question is, how do we bring a little more consistency and a little more thoughtfulness to it? And I also really agree that while transparency is necessary, it's not the answer, right? It just raises a whole new set of problems that
because I think you got the point, Lucas, because this is why we call it the great deplatforming here at the IFCN, because suddenly it was Trump. But I mean, I could probably say millions and millions of accounts have been blocked before Trump, and we've seen this for a long time, and now it became the topic. It's quite interesting. And what your last point on transparency hits what Angie was saying in the chat. I was kind of reading. Yeah, I mean, transparency is the path, but not the final answer, right? This is really, really interesting. And to move forward a bit on the questions, guys, I have to ask Harrison's question, because he's our reporter at the IFCN. For those who don't know Harrison, he's the greatest. And he wants to ask, like, what can the cyclical, Harrison, take a look at the wording that you put for me. What can the cyclical resurgence of anti-Semitic hoaxes teach us about how we fight misinformation? I mean, I hope I had a good English here, but Lucas, I think you can talk a bit about anti-Semitic. I mean, it's a big thing here in the US. It's becoming,
I think the lesson is just that that you never permanently, misinformation is a feature of human social life, right? So it's not something that we can sort of defeat. It's not going to be like the polio virus where we finally stamp out misinformation and then we could, have only enlightened political discourse. I mean, it is a feature of human interaction. It takes different shapes depending on our media environment and our political environment. But it is, but as Harrison says, it is cyclical. And there are many different kinds of misinformation. Yeah, I agree. It's a good example. I really hope that we get to
Let's go.
Young's question. Sorry.
Which one? Which one? You can get that. Which one?
About the question about getting away from the giant platform. This is the third one down, I think.
Okay.
There have been a few echoes of this in
go,
the
go,
chat.
Go.
Our question is, do we push people onto many smaller platforms? And will that be harder to police in effect, right? And it is such an important question because on the one hand, we want to regulate, I think, there's a lot of call for treating large social media companies sort of like regulated monopolies, but the ability to, there's also a call for breaking them up, right? And I have found myself at least sympathetic to both of those arguments at different points, but they're really in tension with each other, right? And if how do we regulate smaller platforms that inevitably rise? And if we break up, if we separate some of these giants, can they be regulated as effectively? Is it an easier world to monitor if we have a handful of big platforms that can apply policies consistently and that can be scrutinized? I just think it's a really difficult question. I really wonder what Chico thinks about that. Yeah.
Chico, I'm thinking here about the law, the bill that we were about to, it was approved in the Senate in Brazil. Like it's clearly thought for Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter. And then I remember we discussing a lot that, wow, what about the next platform that is about to come? I mean, there is this correlation.
Yeah, like strong regulation spooks competition. I think, like, of course you have nuance, but if you have like very difficult rules to abide, only a few will survive. Because like it creates costs, especially when you talk about like small companies, for example. So yeah, I think I totally agree with Lucas that you have a tension, because like people are at the same time mad that Facebook is spreading misinformation and mad that Zuckerberg has a lot of power. And these problems, they're probably like both are probably problems. But if you solve one, you're not necessarily solving the other one. Actually, if you're solving one, you can create problems to the other one. Like if you break, like as Lucas was saying, like, so I think we need to have a discussion about what we want as a society, what is most important, and how we can strike balance on it. Because like if we want to break platforms, so let's have this conversation, but this conversation will be aimed to provide competition, and because competition is good for users, and not to solve, for example, a disinformation problem. Like this is what we are talking about. We are talking about like how to have competition because competition is good, like as a value. And on the other side, we will have like oversight or regulation, content moderation, because this is right and this is important. Like, and I think it's actually important to have the discussions at the same time, because like I saw on the Great Deplatforming Week, a lots of people saying, oh, Facebook delayed too much the decision of deplatforming Trump, and they're too powerful. And at this, like the next day, we're saying, oh, Apple and Google were doing so wrong on removing Parlay, for example, or they're right about that, and it's difficult to link these two decisions and to see the tension on it. I think Lucas is totally right.
Hey, I think we have 5 minutes left, and I don't want to waste any minute. I wanted to go to Martin Vargas' question, because this is about fact checkers, and he's going straight to the point. Since it's practically impossible to get international rules for all countries, do you think fact checking or fact checkers' work should be used as evidence to deplatforming? And let me add one idea to this. Fact checkers are being targeted and harassed in many, many countries, right? So if fact checkers helped deplatforming, would it be a good for the deplatforming idea, because fact checkers tend to be transparent, tend to have a methodology, right? And we have a code of principles. We have, we are audited every year. But on the other hand, will we be killed in the corner of any street? So what's your take on that?
I mean, I think yes. You really, the more that we can have fact checkers' work being used as evidence in making these decisions in a public way, the better off we are. That's exactly, sort of the direction that fact checking should be built as a public institution. But this goes back to the point about the more that the work matters, the riskier it is. I take very seriously the question you raised, Chris, and I'm not sure what the answer is. Obviously, that exposes fact checkers to physical risks, to legal risks, as Martin pointed out in the chat, and to political risks. It draws more attention to them and can bring threats. So it's difficult.
Chico.
I think that a deplatforming decision should not be a decision about whether you're saying the truth or not. Like, it's a value decision. And the value decision is made by the platform, like the company, and not, of course, the fact checker. So this needs to be clear. Like, companies shouldn't delegate or shouldn't use fact checking as a shield to their value-based decisions. They should stand for them. And I think that this is difficult because they know that when you have an opinion and it's more an opinion than a fact-checking activity, it's more difficult to defend it, because like, you're based on value, you're not based on facts. But this is what we're talking about, right? Like, when you deplatforming someone, when you are taking their right to be on the platform, you shouldn't. You're not necessarily saying that this person is lying. You're like, they're different things, And I think we as civil society, and of course we as people that are concerned with fact-checking activity, we need to push every attempt to, like, they're made to make fact checkers liable to this kind of decision. They are not liable for this kind of decision. They are only doing their jobs. And this is what I think that, and I think like this is an alert for all of us. Like, we need to be very, very aware when this is happening, to say and to point out that people that are doing decisions, like they're taking decisions such as platforms, should be accountable for their decisions that are value-based. And if they're using fact checkers for that, like as an argument, as a part of the process, okay, but the final decisions is it's yours. It's not from fact checkers. It's not a shield. It's not a delegation. It's not something like that.
I love them. So, hey, it's 10 a.m. in Tampa, and I think we saw many of the questions, and I know the community would ask and keep talking about this forever and ever, but I agreed with Lucas and Chico that they would only give us 1 hour of their day, and it's over the first IFCN Talks. Hey, guys, do you want to say like last statement or anything, or just a good week for everybody?
Thanks, everyone. This was really interesting, and obviously, this is only the start of a really important conversation.
Oh, completely. Chico.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really love to be on this morning here with you guys. And yeah, like, thank you for teasing my mind to think about that. And yeah, let's continue to do this together, because like it's already difficult to do it. So together is better.
Together, always better. This could be even the slogan of the IFCN Talks, right, Ferdi, Harrison? Yeah, together we're better. How about that? And well, I want to thank everybody here. We were 60, 70 people. I mean, it's a lot. Thank you so much. And in many time zone, and I know you have a hard time, and this is tough days, it's pandemic. I really want to thank IFCN staff, Baybars, Ferdi, Harrison, Elena, and everybody that makes this possible. Lucas, Chico, love you. It's always good to learn from you. And everybody, you can find this recording again on IFCN's YouTube channel in about, let's say, 2 hours or so. So let's see. And if you have any idea about what could the IFCN Talks be in the next month, please email me or email anyone at the IFCN, chris@poynter.org. And let's keep doing this. It was great to see you and to hear from you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.